Shalom and welcome to the Israel Policy Pod. I'm Neri Zilber, a journalist based in Tel Aviv and a policy advisor to Israel Policy Forum. Back by popular demand, our old friend Amos Harel is with us this week. Amos is, of course, the defense analyst and correspondent at Haaretz. We'll get his thoughts on the ongoing war across all the various fronts, including Lebanon, Iran, Gaza, and probably the question on everyone's mind, how long will this and can this go on for? A lot to discuss as always, and there's no one better on military affairs here in Israel. Let's get to Amos Harel. Hi Amos, welcome back to the podcast.
Hi Neri, thanks for inviting me.
It's our great pleasure as always, Amos. You may remember last time you were on was way back in May. An eternity in Middle East time. But back then we were talking about the IDF ground incursion into Rafah in South Gaza. This week...
The good old days.
Yeah, simpler times, right? Today and this week, I wanted to shift our attention and start with a different ground offensive into southern Lebanon. You, like me, were up there earlier this week on an embed with IDF forces. Start us off. What did it feel and look like to you up there this week?
Well, I should say that I was in a different area than you were. I understand that you went to the western part of southern Lebanon, close to the border. I was at the central area, and I think slightly further inside Lebanon, also a bit different, since what you saw was mostly an area which is not inhabited by Lebanese villages and had more to do with, I think, forest and so on. We can't name the actual village that we visited. This is the IDF policy. I don't claim to really understand what's behind it. But anyway, we went to a Shiite village about 2 miles away from the Israeli border. You could see the homes of the kibbutzim, most of them deserted by their residents now, on the other side of the border from that Shiite village. And inside that village was a sort of compound, a military compound dug by Hezbollah. It starts inside the living room of a regular house, one of the homes in this specific village. But it ends about half a mile away, inside, deep inside a nearby mountain. And this is quite typical, although I'm told that this is the biggest military compound that the IDF has found yet. But it tells you quite a lot about Hezbollah's strategy and its tactics in southern Lebanon in all those years that have passed since 2006, since the last war between Israel and Hezbollah. And I think it's safe to say that we're now entering Lebanon Free, the third Lebanese war, which also happens to be, coincidentally, a sort of a regional war. Not a full-scale one yet, but gradually we're moving ahead stage by stage, not too quickly, but it's quite clear that we're facing a regional war now.
Undoubtedly, and we'll get into the other fronts in just a moment. I wanted to ask you, like in the sector I was taken to closer to the Mediterranean, but there wasn't that much, if at all, face-to-face fighting between the IDF and Hezbollah. It seems like a lot of the Hezbollah fighters chose to retreat, at least to the kind of secondary line of villages a bit farther north into Lebanon, right?
That's true, although the specific place I visited a few days back, there was a small battle there. I think our colleague Roy Sharon from Channel 11 actually got hold of a video filmed by infantrymen from what's called the IDF's 3rd Brigade, the reservist brigade. And there was quite a fight there. I assume that they had previous information about the whereabouts of this tunnel, and when they got near this specific house, Hezbollah gunmen started shooting at them. Another gunman joined later on. As far as I'm told, either one or two of them were killed. at least 6 others that were sleeping earlier inside one of those operational rooms deep underground in this tunnel had escaped. And gradually the IDF managed to actually have a look inside that tunnel. And what they discovered was quite meaningful. When we were at the village on Sunday afternoon, you could still hear some explosives being used both by Israel and presumably by Hezbollah as well. There were all kinds of bombings going on around the village, but it wasn't heavy fighting. It was quite clear that Hezbollah forces have either been killed or were retreating from the village. It was not a sort of a suicidal battle to defend Hezbollah military assets in the village. It's quite clear that the organization, after everything that it has suffered in the recent weeks, prefers, as you said, not to really engage with the IDF. And wherever we see that the IDF has the clear upper hand, where they have the information in advance, whether they come in strong and so on, it seems that Hezbollah would prefer to retreat rather than fight.
To stand and fight, right? So in terms of the ground offensive into southern Lebanon, the question on everyone's minds, I dare say here in Israel and also especially outside of Israel, is how far will it go? In other words, what's your sense of the overall scope of this Israeli ground offensive? Is it just to quote unquote clean this narrow strip a few kilometers deep inside Lebanon, bordering Israel, that you and I visited, in order to remove the threat of a cross-border invasion by Hezbollah or direct attacks by Hezbollah in Israel's northern communities? Or will it be bigger than that, possibly up to and including a push northward to the Litani River, about 30, 40 kilometers north of the border?
So I'll take the safe bet, and I'll tell you that it's a bit too soon to tell. And this is because for so long during this year, I think we underestimated the Netanyahu government's intentions. A lot of people didn't believe that the IDF would enter with its ground forces into the Gaza Strip, even after the horrific massacre of October 7th. Later on, people assumed that the ceasefire reached in late November in Gaza would be maintained and that the army wouldn't go into Khan Yunis. And then in May, as you mentioned earlier, there was all this debate about a possible Israeli incursion into Rafah. And as you can recall, President Biden specifically asked Israel not to enter, and yet Netanyahu insisted. We saw the recent attacks against Hezbollah. It was Israel in many cases that preferred to escalate rather massively against Hezbollah. So it's hard to bet right now where this is going. And yet, speaking to senior commanders from the Northern Command on Sunday, it was also quite clear that they see a timeline, that they would prefer to remain mostly searching villages and searching those, what the IDF called, quite ironically, nature reserves in those forests close to the border, looking for military compounds, and not to enter a massive invasion of southern Lebanon. However, this could still develop in that direction because what usually happens is that once you enter a specific village, Hezbollah, as we mentioned, retreats and then tries shooting at the IDF forces from the next village, which might be, or from the next mountain, which might be a couple of miles away to the north. So there's the possibility that even if Israel within 2 or 3 weeks, let's say, announces that it has finished its military operations in southern Lebanon and it's looking for a ceasefire, that actually Hezbollah forces and their Iranian minders in Tehran would say, no, we prefer to continue fighting even if it's on a low scale, and the war would continue. And in that case, if the government doesn't see an open road ahead towards some kind of a diplomatic solution, which would allow 60,000 residents of border communities from the Israeli side to return to their homes. If that's not possible to do, then we could be facing a situation in which there's an ongoing escalation and in which Israeli forces, in fact, go all the way up to the Litani River. Now, the Litani River, as you mentioned, it's 25 miles away from the Israeli border on the western side. On the eastern side, it could be in some areas 5 or 7 miles away. And still, this is a massive path to progress on, and it will take time. And if Israel indeed decides to go all the way up to the Litani River, it would need a lot of infantry forces and tank units and so on. And there will be much more bloodshed on both sides. Hezbollah, there's no debate over this anymore. Everybody's quite sure that Hezbollah has been dramatically weakened by the last month's events. But I think they can still cause us quite a lot of damage if we decide to continue and they decide to fight us as much as they can.
And on that point, you know as well as I do, there's a debate raging, maybe not so much inside the Israeli system, but definitely outside of Israel, we'll put it that way, with regard to Hezbollah's actual capabilities given the events of the past 3 weeks, especially Hezbollah's what they call strategic assets, the long-range and precision-guided missiles. So right now, we're seeing about 200 rockets a day, mostly aimed at northern Israel, kind of around Haifa, maybe sometimes a bit more south, but still you can consider it northern Israel, and not the, say, 2,000 or 3,000 missiles a day all across Israel, including central Israel and Tel Aviv, that we very much were worried about for the past year and really over the past several years. So do you personally buy the argument, which we hear from the more, shall we say, senior levels here in Israel, that it is because of the massive damage Hezbollah sustained, especially during the air campaign, I believe in September 23rd, that week, all across Lebanon, that took out much of Hezbollah's strategic capabilities? Or do you think it's a choice by Hezbollah so far to conserve these long-range missiles for a future day? It's
probably a combination of both, but I think the first answer is probably more conclusive. Look, I find it hard to remember any war, maybe the Azerbaijani-Armenian war last year, which ended with a decisive victory for Azerbaijan, apparently using a lot of Israeli weapons to reach that goal in Nagorno-Karabakh. But other more significant wars in recent years, I find it hard to remember a case in which one side inflicted so much damage and surprise attacks on the other side in such a massive way within a few weeks. You know what? Perhaps that's true for what Hamas did to us on October 7th, although one should not compare from a moral perspective. But Hezbollah, look at all those events that happened. The beeper attack, then a day after that, the walkie-talkie attacks, then the assassination of Ibrahim Akil, the assassination of so many Red One forces commanders, the assassination of Nasrallah, the massive Israeli airstrikes against rockets and missiles depots all over Lebanon, and finally the Israeli ground incursion into Lebanon. So in all of these cases, for ongoing, this has been going on for more than 4 weeks. In all of these cases, Hezbollah suffered huge damage, lost its leader, his successor, and is now having to do with the third in line of succession, Sheikh Naim Qassem, who is by no means an operational man. He's a religious leader, perhaps a politician, somebody who was always in the shadow of Nasrallah and Hisham Safiuddin. But after those two were killed, he was forced into leadership under the current circumstances. So this is the guy making the decisions. And most of the commanders, the military commanders around him, are either dead, injured, or missing. So he has to do with the number of threes and number fours in all of those units. Then he cannot trust his means of communications. After you've been hit by the pagers and by the walkie-talkies, what kind of phone do you use? What kind of method or system are you using to communicate with the people under you? So it's no wonder that we're having such a hard time fighting. Many commanders have escaped. The IDF has just released a recording of 3 Radwan fighters who were arrested in southern Lebanon in the last few days. So one of them was investigated, and he blamed his superiors of running away from the battle recently. Now, this is, of course, Israel is using that for propaganda. And yet, this happens to be the reality. Many of these commanders are no longer willing to fight under the circumstances. So Hezbollah is not fully operational. And you remember that as well as I do. For years and years, when the IDF was planning for such a war, the assumption was that Hezbollah would be able to launch thousands of rockets and missiles every day, perhaps dozens of them towards the Tel Aviv area. This is not the case. You've mentioned that. 200 rockets is quite a lot. Life in the northern third of Israel, shall we say, has not gotten back to normal in any kind of way. Life is miserable all over northern Israel. And yet this is hardly the worst-case scenarios that the IDF has planned for in the past. However, we do see a slight improvement in Hezbollah in recent days, more attempts to coordinate attacks. They've renewed attacks, strikes towards the Tel Aviv area. Almost every 48 hours, there's an attempt to launch rockets towards central Israel. And of course, there was this, sadly, there was this quite a successful drone attack on Sunday, which killed 4 Israeli soldiers at a base of the Golani Brigade in Wadi Ara, which is somewhere between central and northern Israel. So Hezbollah is gradually recovering and attempting to do more. And as we said, there's also fighting going on in southern Lebanon. Having said all that, this is nowhere near the scenarios, the quite bleak scenarios that the IDF used to paint over the war. For the time being, it's quite clear that the IDF has the upper hand. The question is, in the long run, can we maintain this advantage, and can we translate it in any way to a decisive victory? I don't see this as a very easy path. I think it will be hard to do. It mostly depends on the way Hezbollah's minders in Tehran decide to play it. Are they going to go for an attempt to cut their losses and reach a quick ceasefire? Or are they going to stick to their guns and continue fighting and demand that every ceasefire reach in Lebanon would also include Hamas in Gaza?
Don't worry, we'll get to the folks in Tehran in just a moment. And for the record, Amos, I agree with your argument that it's more of the former, that Hezbollah really suffered colossal damage over the past few weeks. Israel has blown through every quote-unquote red line that Hezbollah ever had. You can't even see the red line anymore because Israel has gone so far past it, not only hitting the Dahia neighborhood in Beirut, but invading Lebanon and not least killing Hassan Nasrallah. And they haven't actually kind of let loose with what we thought their capabilities were, or knew what their capabilities were before the Israeli offensive last month. So hopefully it stays that way. Hopefully. Amos, final question about Lebanon. And as you alluded to earlier, this is, of course, not Israel's first ground war into Lebanon, not by a long shot. The first one took place over 4 decades ago in 1978. That was even before our time, Amos. But I know you closely covered the last Lebanon war in 2006. You even wrote a book about it with our good friend Avi Zakharov. So tell us, how is this campaign going on now different than those previous campaigns? Or is it?
As I said, this is the third Lebanese war, whether we'd like to call that, to call it by name or not. There may be something bigger going on, as we mentioned earlier, sort of a regional war between Israel and the Iranian axis. But if you compare, just by numbers, look at Hezbollah's casualties. There were more than, or close to 500 deaths among its fighters before September 17th, which is the day the pager attack occurred. They've stopped publishing the exact numbers of their losses since then. They're not naming names anymore, or hardly naming names, but I would assume that there are a few hundred more fighters dead. This could be compared, if I'm not mistaken, the Second Lebanese War. There were slightly over 1,000 Lebanese people who died there. About half of them were Hezbollah fighters. And on the Israeli side, it was 166 deaths, about two-thirds of them soldiers. So this is something more massive going on even now. And, the Second Lebanon War was quite traumatic for Israel. Avi and myself, we spent about a year writing a 500-page book regarding that war. Just think of what's going on now. But the Israeli story with Lebanon, of course, is much longer than that. It starts mostly with the fighting against the PLO and other Palestinian terrorist organizations in what was called the Fatah land in southern Lebanon in the early 70s. Then came the war in 82 and then 2006. I should mention that even for myself, you said we were not there in 82. I'm older than you, of course, and I still have memories from that war. This was, for me, I was 13, and for me, this was my first and defining political experience. I had a brother who was a paratrooper in Lebanon. We lost a cousin who was a paratrooper in the same unit who died in Beirut. I attended the demonstrations in Jerusalem and the big demonstration in Tel Aviv in what was known then as Kikar Malchei Israel, Rabin Square in September of 82 after the Sabra and Shatila massacre. And even yesterday, as I was talking to a friend, Gidi Weitz, Israel's best investigative reporter from Haaretz, it turned out that, and Gidi is from Jerusalem like myself and a few years younger than me, it turns out that, he remembered the same stories, and he actually knew my cousin who was killed there. It's a small country, and it's a very small society. And in the end, every loss of life affects us in many ways. So for many Israelis, the whole Lebanese story is a huge one. And I haven't even mentioned those years between 82 and 2000, the 18 years, the stayover, where we, even after Sharon took us to this very costly Lebanese adventure in 82, it took us 18 years to get away from this strangulation of southern Lebanon, and then for Ehud Barak to decide on a retreat, on a full evacuation of southern Lebanon. So the story for me remains tragic. It's deeply political, although, and this is a difference from 2006 and 82, I don't know how this ends, and I have my reservations over the current operational plan and over the outcome. And yet I think the government's actions in Lebanon are quite justified. I think what we see from October 7th, first and foremost, we saw Hezbollah deciding to join Hamas, not with an incursion into Israel, but with heavy barrages of rockets and missiles towards Israel with no provocation from the Israeli side. So this is something that Israel had to react to. And now, as we've both mentioned, having witnessed this ourselves, what we see in all of those military compounds in Lebanon is how further ahead Hezbollah, how much further ahead Hezbollah was compared to Hamas in its preparations for a surprise future attack against Israel. So there's quite a consensus right now among Israelis that this had to be dealt with, that Israel needs to destroy that military infrastructure of Hezbollah if it wants to maintain or to regain some peace and relative calm along the border. I should also mention one other thing, which is I'm not sure that there's a big Israeli strategy here. And of course, this all started with this terrible massacre on October 7th. But what we see gradually regarding Benjamin Netanyahu is that we began this in Gaza. It's materialized into a war in Lebanon. We're now facing a bigger escalation with Iran. And it could go all the way to a regional war, and perhaps with American involvement, and perhaps even in a somewhat far-fetched scenario, an American or Israeli strike against Iranian nuclear sites. So if you look at Netanyahu, something that began as a terrible military defeat, which even threatened his political future, now looks quite different. Netanyahu for years has been dreaming of this outcome of an American attack against Iranian nuclear sites. I can't say that this is off the table completely under the new circumstances after everything that went through during the last year.
I think that's a comprehensive and honest assessment. I have to ask, both out of my own personal curiosity and also for the benefit of the listeners, the 2006 war ended in, shall we say, a flawed UN Security Council resolution that was never really upheld by Hezbollah and by the UN peacekeepers in South Lebanon. The 1982 war, the first Lebanon war, ended with Israel, like you said, holding this massive security zone and a friendly Lebanese militia aiding it in this occupation of southern Lebanon. Do you see one or the other scenario ending this war?
It's a bit too soon to tell. I think what Israel is searching for, if we try for a second to separate between the Lebanese events and what's going on the bigger front, which is Iran, the basic goal here is to push Hezbollah away from the border, reach some kind of a diplomatic solution, which would this time enforce the actual decision and prevent Hezbollah fighters from returning south of the Litani River with their weapons, and create some kind of a new political strategic reality in Lebanon. There are those, both in Jerusalem and in Washington, who hope for something bigger, who think that this is an opportunity to hit Hezbollah even harder on the military level and to limit its political influence in Lebanon, to reach a different solution in which Hezbollah would not take an official part. Because we all know that in recent years, Hezbollah has been calling the shots politically in Lebanon while pretending to stay behind the scenes. It was actually using its military might to dictate most of the decisions made in Lebanon. So some in the Biden administration are saying, look, we didn't support this war, Netanyahu initiated it, but there's a slight or a narrow window of opportunity to actually do something before the elections back home in the States. We'll have to see how this evolves, but for the time being, I'll stick to the narrower goals. If we could push Hezbollah outside of southern Lebanon, this would be quite a feat, considering where we started. And I'm pretty sure, not that anybody can ask Nasrallah now, but I'm pretty sure that in retrospect, if Hezbollah leaders, those who remain alive, think of their decisions during the last year, it would be clear for them that they had made the wrong gamble time after time. And Nasrallah, quite Freudian, the mix-up, but it was Nasrallah who got things terribly wrong twice. You remember, July 12, 2006, the decision to strike and kidnap Israeli soldiers. He later admitted that 2 weeks after the war that this was a mistake, that he never figured that Olmert would react in such a way, and had he known, he wouldn't have ordered the kidnapping. And this time, he didn't have time to admit anything like that. But it's quite clear that his decision on October 8th to join Hamas was a mistake. Time after time, he thought that he understood Israelis perfectly, that he could gamble because Israel would not go all the way and cross red lines in response. And yet, time and time again, it turned out that he was absolutely wrong, that he didn't understand that this was a different Israel and a different Netanyahu after October 7th, and that Israel was perfectly willing to escalate, perhaps slowly, but then quite quickly during the last 2 months. And this is the miscalculation that actually led to Nasrallah's death. Had you told me in July that Israel would assassinate Hezbollah, I think I wouldn't have believed it. Now, looking back, it seems almost a reasonable result of everything that has happened and evolved.
Yeah, he got things very, very wrong, especially for him personally and for Hezbollah. Like you said, the person who for years took, quote unquote, great pride in his reading of Israel and the Israeli public, didn't understand what he was dealing with after a year of firing on northern Israel. And he should give a lot of the credit to that to Yahya Sinwar. As you wrote, Amos, I think today or yesterday, the one person who actually thwarted Hezbollah's grand strategy to invade the Galilee, invade northern Israel, and inflict an October 7th attack like Hamas did from the south, was Yahya Sinwar, who pulled the trigger first. So in that sense, I think you actually wrote this, Sinwar actually spared Israel from a much bigger attack from the north.
Yeah, look, I don't, I'm not religious. I don't see this as some kind of godly intervention or a miracle. And yet it's quite clear that we were lucky that had Hezbollah decided to join on October 7th, to join completely by sending its fighters, its terrorists on a rampage through Israeli communities in the north, we would have found it very, very hard to stop them. One division commander told me they would have gone all the way down to Haifa before we would have recovered, because Hezbollah is a much stronger military entity than Hamas, and its military operational plans for an attack were actually quite more sophisticated and further ahead than Hamas. Writing in Haaretz specifically about a short tour of southern Lebanon and describing what I saw there, part of the response that I got from the political left is, okay, now you're being a mouthpiece for the IDF, for Netanyahu, you're buying into their PR stunts and so on. Well, I beg to differ. I think having seen what happened on October 7th in the South, and both of us witnessed that, if not directly, then immediately after the fact, you could not underestimate the threat that Hezbollah posed on Israel, and we're quite lucky that these plans did not materialize.
Yes, we are. We'll be right back after this brief message.
For infographics, videos, threads, and more on critical issues impacting the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, Israeli politics, U.S.-Israel relations, and regional dynamics, be sure to follow us on Instagram and Twitter. You can find our pages at the links in the show notes. If you rely on Israel Policy Forum for credible and nuanced analysis, please make a gift today so that our work can continue to have an impact. Donate now at the Support the Show link in the show notes.
Shifting to the other fronts, Amos, Iran, as you mentioned, Israel is preparing a severe response against Iran for its massive missile barrage 2 weeks ago. What's your sense regarding what Israel is planning in terms of targeting, and how much is Israel actually listening to and receptive to the Biden administration, and what could be, like you said, a fairly dramatic event in a series of dramatic events over the past year?
So there are three different possible targets, or what they call families of targets in Hebrew. for Israel to strike. A short reminder, Iran launched 181 ballistic missiles towards Israel, attempting to hit the Mossad headquarters, some intelligence bases north of Tel Aviv, and also quite a few Air Force bases. Nobody was killed inside Israel. A Palestinian from Gaza who somehow got to Jericho was probably the unluckiest man between the river and the sea, because he was actually hit by shrapnel from an Israeli interceptor and killed in Jericho from the Iranian attack. But that's the only serious casualty. And yet it's hard to define whether they succeeded or failed. We know that the Iranians are quite happy with the results. We know that the commander of the IRGC Air Force got a specific personal citation from the Supreme Leader for what they defined as an operational success. I think they could find some happiness with the fact that that 5 or 6 million Israelis had to run to their security shelters and so on during the attack. And yet I think that they hoped for more massive casualties on the Israeli side. Now, Israel has said time and time again since October 1st that it would react in a massive way. Gallant, the defense minister, repeated that threat, I think, yesterday. He said it's going to be swift and lethal. And yet this is not happening. And this has to do with the second part of your question, with the coordination of the United States. So there are 3 different targets here. Military infrastructure, which is similar to what happened after the April attack from Iran. Oil or energy sites, which is a new possibility. And, of course, nuclear sites. President Biden has said quite specifically and publicly that he doesn't recommend that Israel would strike either energy sites or nuclear sites. The Americans were not saying out loud that Israel should not strike at all. So that leaves us more or less with military sites. And then, at least, again, I'm using Hebrew slang here, but the generals discussing this are talking of a possibility of closure, of a response which would close the events, or which would open up a new escalation. Most of them, as far as I can tell, are demanding closure or recommending Netanyahu to go for closure, meaning a specific attack against military infrastructure, hoping that Iran would settle for this and say, okay, let the past, let's forget about the past. We will not be friends, but let's call it a day. If not, if Netanyahu decides to go and strike energy sites, this is a very different ballgame. Iran would retaliate against Israel. It was already threatened that it would react against energy sites, oil sites, and so on in the Gulf states. And that would be very, very dangerous for the region, perhaps for the world at large. And of course, the last thing that the Biden administration needs 3 weeks in front of an election is a huge energy crisis in the United States. Older Americans can still remember the OPEC embargo of 73 and 74, that cold winter that had quite massive political effects. After the Yom Kippur War, this could repeat itself even before the elections, the presidential elections in the States. So this is a big deal, of course. And this is why the Biden administration is trying both to help Israel and restrain it. We've heard that they've already began deploying THAAD intercepting systems as support for Israel's Arrow systems in the region in order to protect Israel better against possible Iranian retaliation for the Israeli retaliation. And they're also trying to keep Netanyahu on a short leash. Their problem is that Netanyahu understands perfectly that he has the upper hand right now, that during the next 3 weeks, the administration would find it hard to afford a direct fight with Israel, not only because of the Jewish votes, but because it's such a tight race between Harris and Trump right now. And, if we're talking about, tens of thousands of votes in Pennsylvania or Georgia, which would decide an election, nobody wants to take dangerous bets right now about what to do and how this would affect the political reality in the States. So there's a level of coordination going on. There's quite a lot of animosity. It's no secret that the Americans are completely fed up, the Democrats, with Netanyahu. But there's also this possibility, the scenario I mentioned earlier, in which next week a massive escalation occurs. And suddenly, because of an Israeli attack and then an Iranian response, we find ourselves in a situation for the first time in which Israel is seriously considering a strike against the nuclear sites, or even the United States is involved in such calculations because of what Iran has done to Israel in its third attack. It hasn't happened yet. It could materialize quite soon.
Okay. So we'll have to wait and see what Netanyahu decides. For my own sense is that at least for now, they may go for military targets, including some in and around Tehran, and hopefully call it a day, like you said, to close the event. But we've been wrong before about Iran's response, right? I don't think many were thinking that they would launch almost 200 ballistic missiles at Israel just a few weeks ago. So we'll have to wait and see. And you're right, Amos. I was in Washington a few weeks ago, and the first question from many people in DC to me was, is Netanyahu escalating in Lebanon to try to get Trump elected? And I told them I have no proof to that effect. There were, like you said earlier, good reasons for Israel to go on the offensive against Hezbollah, but that was at least the mood on the Democratic side of the aisle in Washington over the past month. Amos, I have to ask you now about Gaza. I don't really know where to begin or end my question.
You don't
so
sound too enthusiastic about that. Yeah.
Because I was telling someone else the other day, you can see how Lebanon ends and comes to a conclusion. You see how you can kind of contain the Iran escalation, but Gaza is I think something else entirely. I don't really see how this thing ends anytime in the near future. Right now, we have a renewed IDF offensive in Jabalia in North Gaza. We have a half-hearted or maybe full-hearted, depending on who's looking, implementation of this insane plan by several former Israeli generals to effectively lay siege to North Gaza, to evacuate the civilian population, and then I suppose consider anyone else there left in North Gaza combatant, and that, I guess, in their minds will bring Hamas to its knees. Earlier today, the U.S. administration issued a strong letter effectively pushing back hard against that insane plan.
They actually wrote a letter. Can you believe that?
They did, pretty strong stuff, giving an ultimatum, let humanitarian aid back into Gaza in the next month, or else the U.S. is threatening to stop weapon supplies to Israel. So fairly dramatic stuff as far as these things go. But that's pretty much it in terms of actual movement that I can tell on the Gaza front. So my question to you, Amos, what can actually make Hamas bend and come to the table and cut some deal for the hostages? And what prospects do the 101 Israelis and foreign nationals still being held in Gaza have in terms of another hostage for ceasefire deal? I mean, what kind of movement can we expect and hope for, if at all, in the coming weeks and months?
Look, Neri, this is not in any way or shape or form a criticism against you, because I share the blame as well. But we're into the 44th minute of our conversation. It's the first time we've mentioned the hostages. Mm-hmm. The hostages was the number one issue for all Israelis for many, many months after the terrible massacre. And yet Netanyahu has succeeded completely in pushing this issue aside. It's a terrible humanitarian crisis. And no one would have believed it a year ago or even 7 or 8 months ago. But it's now been dropped to number 10, 11, 12 on the Israeli agenda because there are so many other things happening. And this is exactly the way Netanyahu wants it. I'm sad to say, but there's no hope on the horizon currently for the hostages. It's quite clear to me and to many other observers for a long time that Netanyahu has no interest in a deal because it's too dangerous politically for him, and that the number one goal for him has always been political and personal survival. He talks highly of moral issues, moral obligations, solidarity, and so on. Yet he's not willing to walk the walk regarding this and to actually reach an agreement which would force Israel to make massive concessions. It's quite clear after a few operational successes in releasing hostages. 8 hostages were released by force, that it has gotten almost impossible to release more hostages alive because Hamas has given direct orders to the guards to murder hostages if they hear anything suspicious, if they see any attempt by the IDF to release more hostages. So we're stuck there. And since politically there's no motivation for Netanyahu to make those enormous concessions in order to release the remaining hostages, and since Sinwar himself has almost disappeared from sight, he's in touch with the mediators every now and then, but he's hiding for a long time now, and he does not seem too keen on reaching a deal. The combination of all of these reasons and developments means that there's no hope for the hostages right now. Now, the IDF would tell you that its operations in the Jabalia area perhaps would lead to some new information, or maybe this would mean more military force than Hamas, and somehow at one point Sinwar would see the light and would go back to indirect negotiations in order to reach a deal. Right now, it doesn't seem to be the case. Maybe, just maybe, if we're successful finally at killing Sinwar, maybe his successors, maybe somebody who would lead Hamas later on would understand that the only way out of this for the Hamas leadership and for the Palestinian people at large in Gaza is to reach a deal and release more hostages. But right now, the sad reality is that there are hardly any negotiations, and a deal does not seem to be in the cards. Now, going back to this operation, this is a divisional operation, so quite limited in scope. It focuses on the Jabalia refugee camp. The goal is to destroy not only Hamas infrastructure, but Hamas terrorist networks that had somewhat recovered during the last 8 or 9 months in which the IDF was hardly operating at the Jabalia area. And also there's a line of thinking saying if we apply more pressure and we push the population out by force, then these are the two things that Sinwar doesn't like to lose. He doesn't care about the population at large, but if people are pushed out of northern Gaza, and if Hamas is losing assets, meaning it could not no longer control certain areas, then Sinwar would feel the pain. But again, this is somewhat far-fetched. We've seen Hamas recover in the past from huge defeats, and Hamas somehow survives. My fear is this, what you've mentioned, the general's plans. Yoav Island, the former general and former head of the National Security Council, is the man leading the way. He's retired now, but some of his ideas, it's as almost as he is lifting a page from Genghis Khan books. He doesn't say it directly, but there's talks of starving the population, of pushing population by force to the south. All kinds of crazy ideas, not necessarily the island himself, but people paraphrasing these plans, and this has somehow infiltrated the IDF's line of thinking. And although I've heard even today generals denying any kind of serving generals, denying any kind of plan going on, the soldiers who are actually in the field and are talking to us, some of them are very worried about this outcome. And this is has an effect all the way to Washington, and this is why we finally see the Americans threatening Netanyahu over these developments. Israel is, of course, denying. It's taking a step back right now. I hope that an attempt to massively transfer population by force would fail, because I think it would be terrible morally and also diplomatically for Israel. It could lead more Israeli officers all the way to the courts in Hague. But we've seen all kinds of silly ideas and all kinds of stupid moves in Gaza. This all comes back to this terrible event on October 7th, which has shocked us all, but has also affected our moral values, the way we fight and so on. In a way, my sense is that Sinwar had it planned all along, that this was part of the plan I've said that before, to pull us into the gutter with Hamas by acting, the Hamas terrorists acting like beasts affected us as well. This moral stain, somehow, we were the victims of it, but also this moral stain somehow has also affected us as well. And I think this is part of the reaction to October 7th. I'm very worried about this as well.
It's very saddening, but unfortunately, I agree with you, Amos. The things you hear and sometimes see politically and also militarily from certain quarters in Israel over the past year, the general's plan, so-called, one of them. Amos, final question to you, to bring it kind of full circle and bring everything together. You, like me, live here in Israel, and like you said, the public is overall supportive of the war, or at least the recent offensive against Hezbollah in Lebanon. But the public is also exhausted and worn out after 12 months of this. Netanyahu has promised, many times in the recent past, nothing short of total victory, and that the war will continue for as long as necessary, militarily, if not politically, for him personally. So the question on my mind, and I know you raise this a lot in your articles, is how long can Israel actually realistically keep up this war? And I ask this more in military terms: munitions, air defense interceptors, the reservists who have been fighting for the better part of a year. If this really is a war of attrition, how long can Israel actually maintain the attrition on its end?
Look, if it depends on Netanyahu, this could go on forever, a perpetual war. For most Israelis, if we compare our situation now to our lives on October 6th, 2023, and of course we'd like our old lives back. For Netanyahu, this is different. I'm entering a psychological zone, if you'd like, and I'm not an expert on this. But it's quite clear for him that this is he's fighting for his life. He's 74 years old by now. He knows that he's about to. There's a strong possibility of him losing his criminal trial, and that if the criminal proceedings against him continue, he may be facing jail time when this ends. He may be 77 or 78, but he could be spending the rest of his life, or at least a part of his life, in jail. And he's willing to fight this by any means necessary. And perpetual fighting on the ground with the army, whether it's in the West Bank, Gaza, or Lebanon, it's a price that he's perfectly willing to pay. This is not what most Israelis are about. And yet many have been persuaded, again, through Netanyahu's rhetorical skills and through his perspective of life and our strategic surroundings, that there's no other way, that this is the reality, And in order to survive in such a tough neighborhood, we would have to continue fighting. And part of the problem I see now is this sort of normalization, normalizing of this abnormal reality. We've discussed that earlier. 200 rockets a day on northern Israel. Once every 48 or 72 hours, there are sirens in the Tel Aviv area. How is this normal? This is something that we've never encountered for a long time before. We all knew about the threats. We all knew that they were building rockets arsenals all over the place. We've heard about General Soleimani's Ring of Fire. And although people like me and you have been dealing with this and writing about this for years and years, I think none of us could actually imagine this, could actually picture the details of such a grim reality. For Netanyahu, this ongoing war may be a necessity and maybe even something quite positive. It's better than to have the trial continue. His testimony in his criminal trial is supposed to begin on December 2nd. I think it's quite a safe bet to assume that this is not going to happen anytime soon. There's hardly any political threat. He's now stronger than ever because Gideon Saar has actually crossed to the other side, and now joined the coalition. So there's a coalition of 68 members. There's no way of forcing an election before late 2026. And for him, perhaps this is the best case scenario. For everybody else, again, I beg to differ. I think it will be very, very hard for families of reservists, for families of combat soldiers in a regular service who have seen nothing but fighting for the last year, for the economy, for millions of Israeli taxpayers that are going to spend much more money and get much less in return from the government or in everything they do. And so the outcome is quite troubling in the time being. I don't see any, there's no nothing on the horizon that promises a better ending. There are better possibilities. Normalization with Saudi Arabia, some kind of public recognition of a possible path to a two-state solution later on, but nothing of this is possible right now because Netanyahu is stuck in this unholy marriage with Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. This unholy alliance is blocking any path to progress. So what I see right now is an ongoing fight that I hope doesn't escalate into these very dangerous areas I mentioned, the nuclear sites in Iran, perhaps Iran making a decision to rush and become a nuclear state finally. There are dangers lurking ahead. And in spite of all of this recent wave of success, everything we've encountered in Lebanon, and even if you go back to Gaza, the successful assassination of Mohammed Def and so on, I can't see a very positive scenario on the horizon. I think we're heading for tough times, and the only guy I can see earning anything from this is Netanyahu himself.
It's very, very sobering, Amos. But I think a realistic.
I hear that word a lot recently. Yeah. You must be a great time at dinner parties these days. Although I don't know how many. They've stopped inviting me recently. Yeah.
Yeah. But I have to just ask quickly: despite what Netanyahu may or may not want to keep this war going, can the IDF keep up this pace of fighting? We're not talking weeks, but a few more months.
Up to a point, they can. Again, if there's no other choice, and if it's about defending the country and defending Israeli society, yes, the commanders will make an effort. Yes, soldiers would lose lives in order to protect Israel. The problem is always, and as I said in the beginning, I found this a justified war, whether it's in Gaza in response to the terrible massacre, or even in Lebanon in response to what Hezbollah has done and tried and what it tried to do to us. But all the time, we should also remember that there are political motives behind this, and that Netanyahu wants to continue this not only for justifiable reasons, but also for his battle of survival. And I think there's quite a difference and quite a distance now, a gap between Netanyahu's interests and the good of the Israeli society, if you'd like.
I think that's a fair assessment. And on that note, Amos, I will let you get back to work. I know the newspaper is trying to get a hold of you. We appreciate your time as always, and let's hope for better days ahead.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Neri.
you weren't too convinced by that send off, but I suppose all wars end, right? All wars end. So it's a question of how you end them.
Hopefully, there's one of the oldest blues songs I love. It's called James Alley Blues. There's a singer from New Orleans, if I'm not mistaken, called Richard Rabbit Brown. I think it was recorded in the 1920s or something. And his quote is, "I've seen better days, but I'm putting up with these." So it's more or less my slogan for the time being.
That's a good motto, Amos. And, we'll leave it at that with the blues song. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Okay, thanks again to Amos Harel, as always, for his generous time and insights. Also, a special thanks to our producer, Jacob Gilman, and to all of you who support Israel Policy Forum's work. Do consider making a donation to Israel Policy Forum so it can keep being a credible source of analysis and ideas on issues such as these that we all care deeply about, including this podcast. And most importantly, thank you for listening.